Okay, let's go through the indictments real quick, Professor. Let's start with, we'll go chronological order. So the first one was Stormy Daniels' hush money payments in New York City. What do we need to know about this? What's the important legal theory or legal point to make here?
Sure. First of all, it's a bookkeeping entry violation. It's not the act of paying her money is not alleged to in and of itself be criminal. It's how they recorded it on the books and records. And normally that would be a misdemeanor charge, and the statute of limitations if it would ever be charged at all. I mean, I don't know. Do they really charge for those people for those criminally for that sort of thing? Where you pay somebody off and you record it one way and it should have been recorded another way. I don't think that's a common charge, but if it were, it would be a misdemeanor under New York law. And what they did is they came up with a very novel theory, because under New York law, if the bookkeeping entry is done criminally in order to hide some other crime, then it can become a felony. So they've come up with a novel theory, which has been roundly criticized, that this was somehow facilitating an election law, a federal election law violation, which he's never been charged with. So they came up with this novel theory to turn a misdemeanor into a felony so they could try to get around the statute of limitations. I don't think there's anybody who thinks that's a serious charge. I mean, it's serious in the sense that he can get convicted, but I think the likelihood it would hold up on appeal is small. It should never get to trial because it's untimely and it's a novel theory which has never been accepted anywhere. So New York.
So I'm going to try to get this right. So the paying of hush money, right? Very bad sounding, not illegal. Covering it up in your books.
Every day in lawsuits around the country, you pay somebody to settle and they sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Okay. So fudging it in the books, like entering it as legal retainer and not hush money for porn star, that may be misdemeanor, but it's a felony because that payment, they say, benefited his campaign and was not disclosed as a campaign expense. So because the bookkeeping cover-up a different federal crime, this election campaigning, therefore, that's now a felony in New York City. Is that right?
That's basically right. And what they're missing is the campaign didn't pay that money. Okay, that's the problem. This was, there have been other people who were charged. I think maybe John Edwards, this was part of the charges against him that got thrown out eventually because that's not really a legal violation. So I don't think I've heard anybody, left or right or center, who is saying that what is happening in Manhattan is legitimate. I should say nobody serious is saying that. There are, of course, political people who will say anything, but I don't think any lawyers are seriously saying what Alvin Bragg is doing is legally appropriate.
Wow, very interesting. Okay, let's move to number 2. Mar-a-Lago classified documents in Florida. What do we need to know about that legally?
I've always said that's the most direct threat to him legally because it's a relatively simple case. Unlike Alvin Bragg, who's created this cockamamie legal theory to try to get to Trump, there's no cockamamie legal theories there. Donald Trump was either legally entitled to have those documents or he wasn't. A court will determine that. That's a legal matter, not a factual matter. He's either entitled or he's not. Most people say he was not entitled to take anything he wanted when he left the presidency. There are some people who say he's the president, he can take anything he wants, and the second he leaves office with it, it's declassified. I don't think that's going to hold up, but that's a legal matter. The courts will decide that. There's nothing complicated. The factual things there are not complicated. He had the documents. That's going to be easily proven. But then there's the obstruction of justice, which is a little bit more complicated factually, but is not really complicated legally. The obstruction of justice is allegedly 2 things. One, the moving of boxes to hide documents from his own attorneys who were complying with the subpoena for records, and that he arranged for boxes to be moved so the attorneys wouldn't be able to go through them. And presumably the allegation is that in those boxes were responsive documents. They'll have to prove that. So it's factually interesting, but legally not complicated. The other part, which I think is a very big threat to him, is the claim that which was added in a superseding indictment, that he not only moved boxes, but he instructed employees at Mar-a-Lago to try to delete videotape, surveillance video that was under subpoena. And again,
Okay.
factually, they'll have to prove it, but legally, it's not very complicated. So I think the documents case in Florida is the clearest risk to him, assuming the feds can prove the facts of what happened.
Yes. And does that go to a jury in Florida?
I normally would, yes. And I assume he's, upholding his right to a jury. He hasn't waived that. So I assume it's going to go to a jury in Florida. It's federal court. It's going to be drawn from, I believe, a district that's relatively favorable to Trump. So, his best bet in Florida probably is what's commonly referred to as jury nullification, that he gets some Trump supporters on there. Of course, the prosecution will be questioning jurors as to their, political support for him, but that could be an issue. But even if you get jury nullification, unless you get all the jurors to agree it's not guilty, that just means you have a second trial and a third trial and a fourth trial. So while he may have a little bit favorable in getting a hung jury there with jury nullification, it's not ultimately going to get him off unless the entire jury were to agree to that. So I think Florida is a big threat to him.
Okay, so that's interesting. So let's, how many, 12 people on the jury?
Yes.
Okay, so 12 people. So to be guilty or not guilty, it's got to be unanimous in either side?
Right.
Wow. So anything other than that, one Trump holdout, or the other way around, hung jury, and they keep doing the trial over and over?
Yeah, well, assuming the prosecution wants to, and I have no doubt they would want to here. But yes, when you get a hung jury, you have a second trial.
Wow, that seems inefficient, if nothing else. Okay, very interesting. So that's interesting that what you would think is maybe the most clear cut, maybe most difficult for him, is also the only one that would be in a jury pool that is most favorable to him too. So that's an interesting balance. Okay, let's jump to the third one. So the third one chronologically would be January 6th. So you mentioned earlier that he's not charged for anything for the riot or insurrection of January 6th. What is he charged with?
Yeah, so in D.C., he is charged with conspiracy to commit essentially electoral fraud, to deceive people, including including Mike Pence and others, into thinking that he actually had electoral votes that he didn't have through these quote unquote fake electors. It's also alleging that he deceived and lied to people in order to convince them to take official actions that would facilitate him. But he is not charged with inciting the January 6th riot. Those criminal conspiracy charges are essentially the heart of the case. He's also charged with violating a law or attempting to violate a law which protects voting rights. Again, a post-Civil War law meant to protect freed slaves from having their voting rights interfered with is now being applied in this context, saying that by trying to deceive people and lying about the electoral count and the electors, and that he attempted to violate the voting rights of citizens. So that's what the case is. But again, people forget. It's not actually, they have not charged him with inciting violence at the Capitol. It's mentioned in the complaint, but it's not one of the charges. And I think that's what's astounding, is that the actual interference with the electoral count was the riot. That actually did postpone things, didn't stop it, but that was an interference. All the things Trump's accused of in the complaint, in the indictment, never actually succeeded in interfering with anything. These are all attempts to interfere with things. So you have this odd situation. The reason we're all talking about this, and the reason it's been an issue now for approaching 3 years, is because of the riot interfering with the electoral count. And that's the one thing he's actually not charged with. And that, I think, is may not be a legal problem. He's either guilty of these other charges or he's not. but it's very peculiar that we're charging somebody because we're not charging somebody with the thing that actually interfered with the election count. We're charging him with all his failed attempts that didn't actually interfere with the count.
Nothing like this has ever been done before. It's called Politics by Faith with me, Mike Slater. We are bombarded with news all day long, and I don't know about you, but it makes me anxious and worried and all these not good feelings. So in Politics by Faith, we take the news of the day, we lament the brokenness of it, and then we take the turn and we give you a biblical or historical perspective, and hopefully that will bring you some peace so that you can fall asleep at night and reminding you of what is in your control and also what is not. Hopefully this will change our perspective of how we look at the stories of the day. Politics by Faith, it's available now everywhere you download podcasts. Politics by Faith with Mike Slater.